Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the CoMoUK Annual AGM for 2022. My name is Matthew Clark. I am the chair of CoMoUK. I'm very pleased to welcome you all here today. I'm just going to make a moment whilst everyone filters in through the waiting room, and then we'll start matters. It's going to be myself presenting, and then we'll go over to Martin Hill, who will look at our accounts. And we have Richard Dilks, Chief Executive of CoMoUK, in the background to answer any questions you might have. So if we can go to the next slide, I'll just go through the agenda for today. Okay, so first of all, we're just going to remind people of the different membership options of CoMoUK and what that means for voting. We then have a number of formal items on the agenda. The first of those is to approve the minutes from the last AGM. We'll then be voting on some trustee positions. I'll then be passing over to Martin to run through the accounts and the Treasurer's report. He'll also cover reappointing of our auditors, and then I will present a short report of activities over the past year. If we can go to the next slide, please. So, as part of the AGM, there are a series of votes. I'll cover in a moment how we will carry out those votes using Zoom, but first of all, just to cover who is eligible to vote. So there are three categories of members who are able to vote in this AGM today. The first is accredited operator members. So hopefully, if you are an operator of a share mobility, you will know if you are accredited or not. If there are more than one representatives from each operator, please decide which individual will pass your accredited operator member vote. So in terms of operator members, it's one vote per organisation. There are also associate members. So these are other businesses that have paid to become members of CoMoUK. Again, it's one vote per organisation, please. And finally, we have Friends of CoMoUK, which tends to be individuals, and these are people who are have paid a nominal £1 to be members of CoMoUK. If you're unsure if you're a member, you can check on the CoMoUK website in the background, and that should then be able to tell you if you're a member or not. Great, thank you. In terms of the voting process, we will be using the hands up function in Zoom. For those of you who are not familiar with that, there is a reactions button, I think, at the bottom of your screen. If you can use the raise hands function to vote, and we're going to be voting either for or against the different items on the agenda. In between the for and the against, we have Dave Sage in the background who will take the hands down. So I'll make sure the hands are down between the for and against votes. Okay, hopefully that's all clear. Next slide, please. Okay, so the minutes of the 2021 AGM were circulated by email. They are also summarised on the screen here. What I would like to do is I would like to have a vote for people who are for approving those minutes, and then a vote for those who are against approving the minutes. So again, using the raise hands function at the bottom. So first of all, if I can ask you to raise your hands if you are for approving the minutes of the last AGM. Give that a moment to settle. Okay, I can see the numbers rising. Okay, I can see 9 people for. Thank you very much. You can have the hands dropped. Okay, then I can ask if those who are against approving the minutes, if you can raise your hands now, please. Just give that a moment. Okay, 0 against. Thank you very much. Okay, if we can go to the next slide, please. Okay, as with any charity, we have a board of trustees, and in that board of trustees, we have individuals who leave and therefore need to be replaced. And in this last year, we have, during the year, co-opted 2 individuals onto the board, and we just need to confirm those elections at this AGM. So the 2 people who we co-opted onto the board during the year were Nick Eversett from CoCars. Nick is representing the car club sector at the moment, and this was a position that was previously held by Mark Hodgson from CoCars, who is stepping back from his role for a little bit, and so Nick is stepping into his place, representing CoCars as part of the operator members. Then Claire Linton from the Urban Transport Group has resigned over the period of the year, and we have co-opted James Padden from McDonald. So what I would like to do is to, taking those two individuals separately, do a vote for electing these to the board and a vote against. So firstly, if we can raise hands for the election of Nick Eversett from CoCars, please. Okay, we're just letting those numbers settle. Okay, we have 8-4, and if you can drop the hands, please. There was also a thumbs up, so that may be maybe 9-4. If we can drop the thumbs up as well, just to, I don't know if we can do that. Thank you. And then anyone against the election of Nick Eversett for CoCars? Thank you. Okay, the next election is for James Padden from McDonald. Can I have hands for those people of 4? James Padden. Thank you. We've got 9 and a clap of hands. So I think we'll actually 10 votes. Thank you very much. Hands down. And just on this slide, any votes against electing James Padden to the board? Thank you. Just as a point of information, the operator members, of which we currently have a member for car clubs, we have a member for bike share, and we have a member for digital demand responsive transport, are on a 18-month period, upon which we open it up for another accredited operator or operators from those sector to put their names forward. And that will be happening in the new year. And I will be communicating out to members if the people want to put their names forward. So that'll be happening in the new year. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so and carrying on with the formal business, each year we need for the non-operator board members, those who have been on the board for the longest need to either stand down or they need to put themselves forward to be re-elected. And this year we have 3 board members who would be standing down, and all 3 have kindly agreed that they will be standing again. Those people are Kate Gifford from West Yorkshire Combined Authority, Joseph Steele Driver from BEV, and Alistair McInroy from Technology Scotland. Okay, I will go through these all separately. So firstly, if we can have votes for re-electing Kate Gifford from West Yorkshire Combined Authority, please. Hands up. Okay, that's 10 hands up. Thank you very much. You can put the hands down. Thank you. Any votes against Kate Gifford being re-elected? Okay, there's 0 there. Thank you. Next is to re-elect Joseph Steele Driver from BEV. Votes for, please. Okay, we have 11 for. If we can drop the hands, please, Dave. Thank you. And any votes against re-election of Joseph Steele Driver? Okay, that's 0. Thank you. Next, if we can have votes for Alistair McInroy from Technology Scotland to be re-elected to the board. Okay, we've got 11 for. If we can drop the hands, please, Dave. I think the last one is votes against re-election of Alistair McInroy from Technology Scotland. Okay, I think that's 0. Thank you very much for those votes. If we can go to the next slide, please. Okay, I'm going to pass over to Martin Hill now, who will cover the Treasury reports and accounts for the last financial year. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Matt. So this is Martin Hill, so I'm the treasurer for CoMo. So I'm just going to go through a couple of sort of summary numbers in terms of income and expenditure. And then we've got two proposals to accept this year's reports and to reappoint our auditors. Next slide, please. Thank you. So this is just this kind of summary. All members will have received this year's accounts. You can also find them on the Charity Commission site the last 5 years. What you can see here is the income is down a bit in 22. The income overall is actually a little bit choppy, and that tends to come down to individual grant timings and so on, not necessarily representative of a real change in the income. I'll talk about that a little bit more. And again, matching, the expenditures reduced, and we've continued to make a good income. So we've actually been able to add to our reserves. And you can see we've sort of increased, have a very healthy cash balance position at the end of 22. Next slide, please. So one of the things about that cash position is that we think it's actually more than we need, and it's more than the Charity Commission guidance is in terms of maintaining a safe level of reserves, which there are some sort of standard guidelines for how you do that. So this gives us some capacity to actually look at fundraising. So there's sort of really two actions we've done. One is a specific fundraising project to get in a third party to start looking at opportunities for CoMo to replace some of the grant income, which we see declining as a result of the sort of some EU project funding that we're going to lose. So we're going to be doing that, and then also we've actually increased the headcount slightly and increased our overall staff costs by sort of 20% from the previous year. But we sort of see this as very much investing in CoMo's future. Next slide, please. So this is a breakdown of the income. One of the things this highlights is that CoMo is very sort of sensitive to the Transport Scotland grant, which is sort of just under half of the overall income that you can see here. And again, this is sort of managed by CoMo on a sort of 3-4 months in advance and annual basis, but it does give obviously some sort of financial concern, really, just to manage that income overall. And again, you can see the EU grants element here of 20%. So we've been managing that. Membership and accreditation has sort of stayed up well and is looking good, as has consultancy. Although again, the consultancy element is often juggled with existing staff members and their workload, so it's obviously often capacity constrained, which is another reason why in bringing new staff is sensible. And we've continued to find that the income from the conference has been good, even as they've been just online. Next slide, please. So I would like to ask for your proposed to raise your hands to accept the 2021-22 accounts. So if you could do the appropriate on Zoom, that would be great. Dave, I actually can't see on my implementation of Zoom the hands, so if you could tell me the numbers and that we're okay on that.
Yeah, we had 11 hands there. Got a capture of that, thanks.
Okay, thank you. So if you could bring your hands down, and again, I think we're saying if there's anybody against them, so if there's anybody who wants to challenge them, please raise your hands now. Okay, I'm going to assume that's all good, thank you. So if you can go to the next slide, please. So we'd like to reappoint the auditors that we've been using for the last few years. So the proposal is that Naylor Wintersgill are reappointed as our auditors of CoMoUK. If you could raise your hands for that, please. Okay. If you've got that, Dave, that would be great.
10 or 11 again, yeah.
Okay, lovely, thank you. Okay, I think that's it. Next slide, please.
We do just have to have a one for anyone who's against the audit.
Sorry, of course. Yeah, thank you. So if anybody is against the proposal to re-elect mailers, thank you. Okay, great, thank you very much.
Okay, it's back to me. So thank you very much for that, Martin. So it's my pleasure to present to you today a report on the activities in the year 21-22. As due to the timing of this AGM, we're reporting on effectively what's happened in the financial year, and also an update of some things that have happened in the last few months, as it kind of makes sense given the timing of this. Great, if you go to the next slide, please. So CoMoUK has a range of roles, and we'll be talking through a little bit about each of these areas. The first area being advice and general support across the industry. The second is sharing knowledge of the new developments and opportunities and challenges in the sector. The third is research and the evidence base, typically for the benefits of shared transport services. The fourth is influencing policy and how future government decision making. And the fifth is setting standards. So we're going to touch on each of those in turn. Go to the next slide, please. Just to note, there'll be a chance to ask questions at the end, so feel free to think of anything you want to ask, and myself or Richard Dilks will be available to answer any questions. So the first is a one-to-one advice. So through the work that we do for Transport Scotland, we provide one-to-one advice on community schemes, and these can include a micro grants program where we're awarding small amounts of funding to for specific projects. And the work we've been doing up in Scotland is covering a wider range of topics than previously, so including the built environment, including specific work with the rail industry, and obviously shared transport more generally. Outside of Scotland, in England and Wales, we provide one-to-one support for authorities on a ad hoc basis. Plus, we also support a range of consultancy projects based on the capacity of staff. And CoMo is currently engaged in 7 of those projects in various different places on different topics. Next slide, please. In terms of public-facing engagement, all of those on this call will be very aware of the benefits and opportunities of shared mobility, but public engagement is key to helping to translate those benefits to individuals around the country. And a couple of these projects, which we've been funded for in Scotland, include the Travel Better tool. There's a web snapshot of the tool here, and this is about targeting individuals in locations where shared mobility options exist in Scotland, and helping them to understand how those shared mobility options can help them, whether it's improving the way they travel, reducing carbon, saving money, or indeed getting fitter. And that's a live project that we've been working with Transport Scotland. A project which we're just getting started with is looking at 2 low emission zones in Scotland. So these are in Edinburgh and Glasgow. And this is a project focusing on low income areas and how shared transport can help in the transition to those low emission zones. Next slide, please. So CoMo produces a range of guidance documents, and this year there have been 3 that I wanted to highlight particularly, that are designed to help different stakeholders and different participants. The first of these is demonstrating how shared mobility in its various forms can support new housing developments and mixed-use developments. So effectively allowing developers to build more sustainable developments with a lower reliance on private car ownership, and indeed the need to provide dedicated car parking or car parking at lower levels. So that's an updated report here. The second is focused on the decarbonisation of car clubs and the opportunities, challenges, and ways forward for the incorporation or the mainstreaming of electric vehicles in car clubs. So this is particularly thinking about the infrastructure that's required to support that transition. And the third document is an updated version of bike share guidance for local authorities. So this is very much thinking about how to implement whether it's a new bike share system or indeed a retender of a bike share system. And this is based on engagement with the industry, changes in funding, and also the enhanced evidence base that we have from various surveys that CoMo carries out. All three useful documents that CoMo is sharing to help the sector. Okay, next slide, please. So focusing on guidance in Scotland, there are three documents here which, or three things I wanted to highlight. The first is Knowledge Centre. So this is pulling together with a particular Scottish context, a wide sort of portfolio of information that will help the development of shared transport schemes in Scotland. And this has been funded by Transport Scotland, and you can see in the bottom right the sort of portal to access that. And there are a range of other sort of information sources, including, I think for the first time, a series of podcasts, which we talk with relevant people, sort of case studies to kind of bring to life some of the shared transport successes. Also, this is supported by some videos of community projects in Scotland. So both, I guess, taking the step on from a printed document to something a little bit more engaging. So good to see those there. And the other one I wanted to highlight is guidance in terms of mobility hubs. And you can see there two documents which have been produced. There's the Mobility Hubs Toolkit, and then more specifically, a document thinking about the design process of mobility hubs. Anyone who's been involved in the mobility hub sort of area will know how much the original CoMo image of a mobility hub has been used. So I think this design process helps to kind of take that the next step to actually getting thinking about how things might work in local contexts. Okay, next slide, please. So there's been a lot of work that has been carried out in the last year in refreshing and really developing the new website, which you can see here. Hopefully many of you have been using this. Certainly it's an excellent resource for lots of information, all of the things that I've talked about. And this also had a slight tweak to the brand identity of CoMo. So the colours remain the same, but the logo and the style there has been updated and refreshed. So I think there's definitely a positive move. And I encourage you to explore that website, for there's an awful lot of resources on there, and to familiarise yourself with that. Next slide, please. So part of CoMo's role is knowledge sharing, and this slide shows the range of engagement and knowledge sharing activities that CoMo carries out throughout the year. The themes you can see on the left-hand side. These have evolved over the years, bringing together the more established forms of shared transport, cars, bikes, and wider themes, recognising that shared e-scooters are currently subject to trial, and therefore have some different questions that we're dealing with shared e-scooters in a separate forum. Then a digital demand responsive transport forum, which is an addition, and then geographically focused and other thematic focused knowledge sharing events. And you can see across the columns here, we have forums which are for local authorities only, where authorities are free to kind of explore things that they maybe wouldn't want to discuss more widely, and learn from each other. And then we have other events, which include operators and people from the industry, and then open events as well. So a real range of knowledge sharing events. And I think that's kind of been expanded over the last year, recognizing the diversity of the shared mobility ecosystem. Okay, next slide, please. So I wanted to just touch on the Shared Transport Conference, which happened earlier, in fact, just a week ago. It was online again. I think it was certainly a success in terms of the mix of people we had. We had 8 sessions over 2 days, around 500 registrations, and of the sessions, and we had around 90 people per session. So if you add that up, many people taking the opportunity either to tune into many, or those that they had time for, or that they were particularly interested in. We engaged with 44 speakers, and that enabled 22 companies and community projects to be showcased. Certainly the online method allows a wider range of people to attend. I think in the next year, we will consider the benefits of face-to-face as well. I know that those people who were able to attend the social events in the evening thought there was a lot of value there. And so it's about the balance of reach and engagement to think about going forward. But thanks for all the hard work on the conference. Next slide, please. So the research programme has always been a backbone of CoMoUK and its predecessors in terms of helping the industry and local authorities to understand the impacts and benefits of each of the different shared mobility modes. And once again, CoMo has updated the annual Car Club research report in its different geographic areas, and the same for the bike share research report. And I just wanted to kind of highlight that there will be 2 new research reports coming out imminently. And those will be one on e-scooters and a research report on digital demand responsive transport. So look out for those in the coming, we're now 2 weeks before Christmas. I think it's going to be, I will defer to my colleagues, but I think it will be imminently. Okay, next slide, please. So influencing policy in terms of future direction and supporting the various elements of shared transport are, as always, important. And as the Department for Transport has its reorganisation and new offices are in place, we've been taking steps to engage with those colleagues working on decarbonisation and what the next steps are there. And really, I guess the second bullet, making sure that the profile of shared transport is kept high. I think in recent years we have had some good successes in terms of getting shared transport written into a number of documents, but in a large organisation such as the DFT, it's making sure that as many people as possible are aware of the benefits, and including various forms of shared transport in policy. We've also been quite active in the world of EV charging and EV supply, recognising that, particularly thinking of car clubs, that there is a particular case for public support for EV charging and infrastructure in that sector. We're also involved in the kind of evolving spatial planning policy changes. And I would be remiss not to talk about future mobility and e-scooters. I think we've had some disappointing news in the last week or so that the transport bill is delayed, and we press as an organisation for the e-scooter trials to evolve into a more permanent part of the transport ecosystem. Just to note that we don't just look at England and the Department of Transport. Obviously, lots of work in Scotland, and we also have discussions and contacts that we can continue to follow up with in the Welsh, Scottish and Northern Ireland governments, thinking about how shared transport fits into transport policies there. Thank you. Next slide, please. So I think this is one of the last slides. I just wanted to note that CoMo has had a long history of accreditation, so setting the standards and a sort of benchmark for the operators of different shared mobility modes. And this year we continue with this, now with 7 kart clubs accredited, 15 bike share operators accredited, and mobility hubs. We're now on 2 mobility hubs accredited. I know there's an awful lot of work going on considering the planning of new mobility hubs. So hope to see those numbers growing when we move forward. Okay, last slide, please. Okay, so it really brings me to say a big thank you to the staff of CoMoUK, without whom none of this will be possible. So from on the behalf of the board, I'd like to say a very big thank you to staff over the past year, and open up the floor for questions or discussion. Thank you. I get the chance to look at myself for a few moments. I might invite Richard to the floor, because then we can look at Richard as well. And that way, excellent, there we go, we can look at each other.
And as if by magic, it is so. Thank you, Matthew, for taking us through all that.
Actually, I can see a question in the chat, which is from Andrew. So Andrew says, do you know if are there any plans for scooter trials in Scotland? That's a very good question.
It is. So historically, the answer to this has been no. We've continued to explore this with Transport Scotland in particular, but also with some of the Scottish local authorities that showed interest, for example, Glasgow City Council. The legal position, unclear. Scottish Government's legal advice said something different to the UK Government's legal advice. UK Government's legal advice said it would be fairly simple, but it did need a little bit of Scottish Parliament time. Scottish Government's legal advice said it would be very difficult and needed primary Scottish legislation or primary UK legislation, both of which are onerous, to happen, and so it didn't happen. I think, though, Matt referred to the transport bill being put back yet again, so it is allegedly a priority for the UK government in the next parliamentary session after this one, i.e. May 2023 onwards. But I think it's more likely, if we get something, it would be autumn at earliest for an introduction. Best guess, that would mean another 2 years until scooters became legalised and the other things in the bill, which are also really important to CoMo's work, so in particular the shared micromobility licensing framework, that would really all come live probably sometime 2025, maybe late 2025. So from a Scottish scooter perspective, that's a long time to go with no trials, and with your only available e-scooter option being effectively an illegal one, in the sense that they're legal to buy, as we probably all know, but they're not legal to use on public highway because there are no vehicle standards on them. They're not recognised in law. So I think it's something we'll continue to engage in particular TS about, and see if they've got any renewed interest. Likewise DFT, and see if the position might shift there, because the status quo on the e-scooter shared trials is they all run out of time in May 2024. So obviously there's a gap there between then and what I was mooting in 2025. Something has to be done about that. So maybe there might be some new opportunity here. However, we have sort of said and thought that before when trials have been extended previously. So we'll continue to try on this front, but I'm not guaranteeing any success by any means.
Thank you, Richard. Any questions from others on any topics?
Just one comment from me, Keith, from Enterprise. Richard, looking at the finances, they're great and secure, but so much, I think, was it 46% coming from Transport Scotland? So it's a slightly rhetorical question, not just to you, but to all of the other members. What can we do to broaden that base? Because as a former chief executive of a charity in a different life, that's a great figure to have, but all eggs in one basket type analogy. So as a rhetorical question, both to enterprise and to the other operators, how can we help you diversify that? Because obviously, if I were Transport Scotland on the call, I may have a perception that I'm funding an organisation which does brilliant work, predominantly for a population that they're not responsible for.
Well, on the last point, no. TS are paying for work that goes on in Scotland.
Yeah.
There is a pass-through, which is all laid out in the accounts, that goes to CoMo, helps fund a small part of my post and Antonia's. I forget the exact numbers, but we're talking a sort of 10% region, something like. And that's a recognition that you can't have a wider organisation as CoMo is, and as a number of the other active travel delivery partners of Scottish Government and so on are, without having some sort of management oversight role. And indeed, I've spent quite good chunks of my week, as does Antonia, on Scottish matters. So I think there's a inherent in that, which is something TS has been happy to fund for, where are we now, 11 years, I think. There's an understanding on their part that there's a bit of a two-way street. But that's a minor point on the main sort of thoroughfare for them, which is obviously Scotland itself, and that's why we are funded to be able to do lots of stuff in Scotland that, in the detail we can't actually do in England right now, which is something that's not optimal, but better than having nothing in either place. Travel Better tool, Matt touched on, as an example of that. Our ability to have a built environment role solely focused there, or a rail integration role. These are all things I would love to have south of the border, and there's a real need for them, but the structures are different, the funding arrangements are different. So your basic question of diversification and risk and so on, yes, clearly that's there. We've understood that, and I think the basic remedy is to obviously do our best to maintain good future relations with Scottish Government, and I think there is a ton of stuff that we are hopefully going to be helping them with in the next year, but we do have to wait and see. We don't have anything confirmed as yet from spring onwards. Really, it's trying to find other funding sources. So that's something we're actively engaged on. In fact, as part of a way of spending down the reserves, we are going to recruit for a comms administrator role. That is to free up Antonia, our deputy chief exec, from lots of those more mundane tasks, enable her to focus more on fundraising, where at the moment she and I have so little time left after the day job, so to speak, that it's difficult to get to it. And Keith, I know with your background, you'll appreciate that fundraising is not something you just do in a spare half hour on a Friday afternoon. So that should free us up. As to how could yourselves or other operators be involved, I think the obvious move there is one where we can think about, can we be doing joint bids into fundraisers alongside yourself, alongside other operators, alongside authorities, alongside an NHS trust, very open plural sort of process, alongside consultants, alongside anyone suitable, because a number of the things we want to do are project-based things. And so actually, I think probably to make a success of some of these bids, we're going to need some partners on funding bids, because it's going to be about actually doing something. The other fundraising avenue, while I'm on this theme, is just core funding to CoMo itself, to increase its bench strength and capacity. That's the more sort of across the piece, doing more policy, doing more advocacy, having more support roles, etc. But I think there's also opportunities and stuff, and on the ground stuff. So that's some thoughts. Very happy to chat more with you, with any other stakeholder right across public, private, third sector on that.
Thanks very much, Keith.
Thank you, Richard.
We have a couple of questions coming in the chat. I'm going to take one of those. So this is from Jonathan Hampson. So first of all, thank you to the CoMoUK team for the ongoing work. Talked about a number of challenges across the growth of shared mobility sit with government policy. Frustrations associated with this are significant, but how can CoMo be noisier in the years to come to champion respective policy needs, minister roundtables, MP advocacy, etc.? So I guess the question is, good work. How can, I think the question is particularly thinking about ministers and MPs. So is there something more that can be done there? And perhaps is there some support that maybe some people around the call today that can provide.
Yes, thank you. So I agree with the thrust of the question about being noisier. We have made some strides on this in this last year. So, for example, we've asked our first parliamentary question in perhaps our history, certainly in sort of corporate living memory, via Ben Bradshaw MP. We want to step that up. All of this, of course, takes quite considerable legwork to find the friendly MP that wants to ask the question and liaise with their office and so on. I'll come back to that point. We have also had our first chat with the lead transport SPAD at DfT at long last. It's taken me my whole time in post so far to manage that, but we have managed that, where I made this exact point basically of saying UK government has moved quite a bit on the detail with shared transport. We are having really quite productive conversations on a few detailed things. Too early to say anything in detail, sorry to be sort of tantalizing there, but there are two things that might be quite significant moves. We've got quite a lot of narrative rhetoric support in the transport decarbonisation plan. We've liaised very closely, deliberately over the last 2-3 years with Committee on Climate Change, which undoubtedly has an influence on government policy. We're now being invited to give comments, for example, on the National Planning Policy Framework changes that will come. Spatial planning is so important to what shared transport we do or don't get on the ground. So at sort of working level, I think we can genuinely say we have really moved the proverbial needle. The point I made to lead SPAD was, but we're not seeing that at this top ministerial narrative, rhetoric, media level profile. If government policy is that shared transport is a positive thing, which broadly I think we could say now, definitely some blanks around that, for example, bike share, but I think we could claim that. Why are we not hearing about it? Why is it not mentioned in speeches? Can't we do some visits? Can't we have them opening something? Can't we have them trying this stuff out, etc.? So they said taking that on board, so I would very much like to do more of this. As for how anyone can help with it, the particular thing, and I do have this sort of liaison link up with a couple of operators, but I'm very keen to have it with anyone in any space, very much including DDRT, via space, Jonathan, is public affairs activity and links and contacts. So typically we have sort of regular catch up with people who've got sort of live public affairs footprints, because a lot of the work is very congruent, and we can hopefully swap notes and support each other. And that's something I'm keen to do with authorities. Last bit on this, keen also to do with other principally third sector stakeholders, because as the climate crisis deepens and the need for mitigations on it sharpen from transport because its emissions are so high and so stubbornly high, there are more and more people who are on the broad same page as CoMo on so many issues. So it's partly why we got going with the Sustainable Transport Alliance. So we now have a sort of series of collective meetings with DfT, with the NHS, etc., where there's a bunch of sustainable transport NGOs who are able to say, look at our stuff across the piece. It's not just about doing some shared transport stuff. It's not just about doing some active travel stuff. This stuff all interrelates. We have the research to back that up from CoMo. So we've recently joined something that isn't really even sort of publicly launched yet, but it's called the Low Traffic Future Alliance. That's been attractive to me. All these things are free to join. I'm not running around spending money on all this stuff. That's been attractive to me because, yes, it's a bunch of green transport people, but it's also a bunch of much bigger green groups, Friends of the Earth, Greenpeace, etc. And so we're coming at something from more angles than we're currently able to do. We've got the notion in our minds that the election timing is obviously uncertain. We could be up to January 25, or it could be at some point earlier than that in terms of general elections. We've got the London mayoral elections and other elections in May 24 to focus on. So we've taken the view that for drafting up manifesto points and points of engagement, we're going to start on that now in January, which is very, very early in one way, but I think it's going to be good prep, and I hope that we're going to be able to collaborate well with all sectors across this. I think there's a huge amount of shared content, shared policy change profile and so on that we want to see.
Thanks, Richard. There are a number of other questions or comments in the chat. I'm just going to touch on them and then just see. I've got a response to a couple of them, and then I'll pass to you, Richard. So the first one is regarding a forthcoming parking zone in Portobello. I guess that's east of Edinburgh, and the point there is about bringing the public on board. It's quite an interesting one. I think I'll start off on that. So I guess CoMo generally has spent time and been funded to engage with both the industry and the public sector that supports the industry. And in terms of engaging with the public has been less so. I suppose the Travel Better tool is an example of where that has changed a little bit, in that it's designed to encourage the public to try new shared transport modes and understand the benefits. So it obviously is important to bring the public on board. I guess the way I see CoMo is CoMo's role is to support what the public sector policy in this area. In terms of something like a parking zone can assist with shared mobility and so forth, but it's a little bit, it's not the direct role of CoMo to be trying to encourage the public to support particular initiatives in particular geographic locations that are not specifically shared mobility. I think is probably a fair response. That Richard talked about the range of things that we deal with and the areas of focus, and there's a lot that we do. So I think supportive to others on that, but probably not taking a lead would be my comment. And there's another couple of questions about specific bike share schemes in Scotland. I don't know whether, Richard, you want to comment on either the point I've just made or other things.
Thank you. Yeah, so I do get the point with the Portobello zone. There's sort of two big points here, I think. One is that CoMo as a public-facing organisation, on one level, it absolutely is. Part of why we did the new website was to make it much easier to navigate for people who didn't already know something about shared transport or something about how we structure things, what we call things, and so on. It's also why we've done Travel Better tool, as you say, Matt. We've done other points of public engagement in the past as well. The reality is that to truly reach people in a broad sense is extremely expensive and far beyond any budget we've foreseeably got. So I think we have to be very targeted in anything that we do in that space. And in broad senses, we are public-facing, publicly available, but are we going to manage to get ourselves known by the public at large on existing budgets? No, we're not. So then we're into what can we do in partnership? This is a classic of this. It's a theoretical point. We keep on trying to land with authorities again and again and again and again and again. They are more receptive now to it generally than they used to be, but it is still a real battle. In other words, when you're doing something like a parking zone, don't just think of it as a parking zone, think of it as a chance to achieve some mode shift, to save people some money, all the co-benefits that probably everyone on this call is pretty well aware of, with shared transport. So why not be talking about the public transport options in that area? Why not be talking about the bike routes to and from Portobello? Why not be talking about the bike hire scheme, if there was one in Edinburgh, but there will be again, I'm sure. Why not be pointing to the car club cars in the area and do that as a package? I'll take that away with the Scottish team specifically. For something we could be, if it's timely, for something we could be leaning on Edinburgh Council about on it right now. I'm very happy we do that. We are trying this in London at the moment, a long slog with TfL to try to get them to think of the ultra low emission zone in this broader way. Same point. Don't just think about it as get out of a non-compliant car and into a compliant one. Think about it as, do you need a car all the time at all? Can you be using other things? I think we're getting somewhere on that, but it's too early to know for sure. So I'm very sympathetic with the basic point here, and I'll check in and see if there's something we can say to Edinburgh. We have just, you might have seen in the media, been publicly saying to Edinburgh, you really do need to have a bike share scheme. It was a success before, it can be a success again. You really do need to get on with this, and just by luck of timing, on the very same day we were planning to say that, the Glasgow scheme crossed the 2 million rides since 2014 mark, so that provided quite a helpful counterpoint for us to draw. So talking about other Scottish cities and bike share, the whole virtual dock sort of world, I think we are increasingly moving to a world where in the center of whatever place, there has to be some well-organized parking. I don't think it necessarily has to be through physical docks. There's a sort of 3 layers to it: full-on physical dock, which people would be familiar with, marked bay, very well enforced, or virtual bay. I think we're increasing in a world where in the center of areas, it's one of those, the first 2 of those 3. It's either a physical dock or it's a marked bay with really good enforcement. The role of virtual, I think, becomes more plausible all round, and here trying to balance the needs of users and non-users when you get to less dense areas, and where the cost of putting in even just marked bays can be pretty significant, because you need a lot of them to cover a reasonable operational area. In general, though, I think the move is to marked parking overall, and I think that's generally a positive one. We've got to balance out the costs to schemes here, or costs to authorities and so on, but I think having orderly parking is a key sign of success of a scheme all round. And the winter closures, do we like those closures? No. Do we sort of understand them from an operational point of view? Yes, depending. So we'd like to see schemes operate year round. I think it's fair to say, in general, from the feedback I've had, perhaps attributable to climate change and the first phases of winters being warmer, schemes are finding better ridership figures later. So whereas November used to be already pretty thin, November's actually more like October used to be, and October's more like September, and there's been a domino effect there. Clearly the temperatures we have right now, that's a different kettle of fish. So we'd like it to keep on going all round. It will of course come to costs. And so in a sense, it's a question about subsidy and support for schemes ultimately. And I feel like, Matt, there's more questions I haven't caught up with down there.
Yeah, no, I think there's just one more. I think we could have a long conversation about individual schemes in different places, but maybe this is not the time for that. I think there is worth pointing towards guidance that CoMo's put out about new developments and how development funding can be used to secure expansions to existing, whether it's car clubs or bike share or other things. So I think that is one to point to on one of the comments there.
I just popped that in the chat.
Just popped in the chat.
Absolutely, we are trying to engage in this space within our bandwidth. Again, finding some fruitful collaborations. I was on an Office for Place roundtable earlier this week, where there was a lot of furious agreement about how we need to try and change the spatial planning system that would address this. How do you get more in new housing schemes? Because at the moment, we don't have helpful stuff up in the headlines of the spatial planning system, particularly. National Planning Policy Framework, for example, does not mention shared transport. It does not mention mobility hub. It does not mention transport decarbonisation. I mean, at all, in 55 pages, mostly because it's out of date. So that will have to be revised because of this bill coming through, which is currently in the Lords, if I remember right, or going to the Lords. It's worked its way through most of the common stages anyway. And that will also change the design code, the design guide, travel plans, transport appraisal guidance, planning policy guidance. So there's plenty to keep Matthew, our policy and advocacy officer, and me busy here. But hopefully that will, both encourage people who are trying to do the right thing anyway, because that report's full of case studies of people trying to do the right thing and having a tough time. But it will also move the goalposts, ideally, for the whole system to make this stuff both easier to do, but harder not to do. In other words, harder to build things that are solely based around private car.
Thank you, Richard. I think that we have answered all the questions that we have. So unless anybody else has anything they'd like to bring up at this moment, I'd like to take the opportunity to thank everyone for attending. and listening on into what we've been doing, asking questions, going through the formal business, and just leaves me to thank staff again. Thank you to everyone for your support, and thanks very much for attending today. Have a good day.